I was going to ask you if folk music is still about science fiction, but that's a really stupid question. Uh, Let me drop back. Eli Goldberg had pointed out to me that you had written a taxonomy of folk songs. I don't, I don't know if that was in the 70s or the 80s, but
I think it was, yeah, somewhere around then.
yeah, well, those decades were good decades. And I wanted to talk about it a little bit and see if you thought it still held or if there are any new parts of it. Um, I'm going to just, do you want to talk about it or do you want me to just recap it real quick and so that everyone is aware?
Yeah, you go ahead and
Yes,
recap
I
it,
have
and
it, I have it printed in front of
I'll
me.
provide annotations.
So Alpha Filk were songs with lyrics that had been included in sold stories, like Mary O'Meara. Beta Filk were songs about stories. I guess we could put Julia's Firestarter in there. Uh,
Actually, the title of Julia's song is Daddy's Little Girl.
Daddy's Little Girl. Sorry, it's always
Yeah,
Firestarter in my
that's
head. And
better
there's
be
some,
title.
right, so that might be songs that take an existing story and turn it into a ballad, like The Caves of Steel by Randy Garrett. Songs about characters in existing stories, like the one you mentioned about Ian and Kenzie. Um, and fan fiction in ballad form, like from Argo. Original SF stories in ballad form is another part of the taxonomy, like All Debts Are Paid by Jordan Kerr. And then we get to songs about fans and fanish life and particular people. Um,
And their
Gordy
cat.
Dixon is the one. Science fiction is his hobby, but his
His
main
main
job's
job's
having
having fun.
fun. Technology, space program, computers and high tech, um, and then random things that get sung, whether or not they're filk, like Eric Bogle, Stan Rogers, and Kipling, and parodies. So
And Martha, yeah,
tell us about all of that.
yeah. There's within the songs about that show up at Filk's. There's also Martha Keller, that Juanita Colson was instrumental in bringing her body of work into Filk. She was an American poet from the roughly the first half of the 20th century, and she wrote songs about actual historic events. Um, and Juanita picked up a bunch of them and just started singing them, and so they became part of the found filk tradition, along with basically anything Stan Rogers ever wrote. Quite a lot of Eric Bogle, uh, and then there's the whole setting Kipling to music, which shades over into the fantasy with a bunch of his writings, and also uh, the some of them are more military, but then others are definitely out and out fantasy, like you know Puck's song about the history of England.
Yep,
But
yep, yep. Peter
the
Bellamy would have been a great filker if he wasn't so busy with the rest of
right,
his life.
well, I've observed there is a group, a duo out of Northwest Arkansas called oh bah, I'm blanking on their names.
I
On their
jinxed you when I told you you had a great memory. I'm sorry, it's
yeah,
my fault. It's my fault.
um, it's got fish in the name.
Don't stress. It's okay.
Yeah. Anyway, I've been to a couple of their live shows in Little Rock, and I remember thinking, if these guys read science fiction, they'd be filkers, because that's the kind of music they wrote. And in fact, I stole a song from them that they did. It was an old summer camp song uh, about the something or other. You throw it out the window. You throw it out the window, and I proceeded to write a few verses about Spanish topics that got at some point something got thrown, the MacGuffin got thrown out the window. Trout Fishing in America. That's the name of their group. They're still active. They started out actually in Houston, in Texas, and they decided that they didn't want to raise their kids in Houston, Texas, so they moved to Northwest Arkansas, where kids could grow up on a farm and go to a public school that didn't have shootings in the neighborhood.
You know,
And
yeah,
besides, Northwest Arkansas was really central to their area that they wanted to play songs in, because they could go a couple of hours north and get to I-44. And from I-44, that used to be Route 66, you can get to anywhere.
yeah, I think that the um, uh, everyone that enjoys music, everyone that sings, occasionally just just drifts off into parody land or writing their own words or whatever. So I think this is a human instinct that is not easily put in a box. It's not all filk, but it is related.
Right.
Handmade
Well, there's
music.
there's a persistent belief in fandom outside of the Filkish community that Filk is nothing but parody. That's how it started to a great extent, but it is it has always had original lyrics, which were then picked up by people, like Mary O'Meara, picked up by people and set to music.
Mhm.
Um, Green Hills
Well,
of Earth and so forth.
I think
So, and
well,
we've as it evolved, as the talent pool kind of came together and traded brain cells or something. We would get people who wrote more and more original music and more original lyrics, to the point where you get something like Band from Argo, or The Horse Tamer's Daughter, which is a Darkover short story done in ballad form, which Leslie has since converted into a novella, uh, which is published in a book called The Music of Darkover.
uh, all good stuff. You make me want to go back to the filk instead of the parties, and it's been a couple of decades at least since I've done that. Um, Talk to me now a little bit about the effect of the internet on the filking community and filking.
Well, it first started out there were rec music filk and alt music filk in the old Usenet groups, where people could communicate with other filkers on the internet and post song lyrics and such. And a lot of that, then it migrated to LiveJournal, and then it migrated to Facebook and other platforms and YouTube. Uh, there is uh, a couple of some of the musicians have their own YouTube channels now. I know Carla does. Um, and it, but the biggest thing that happened to Filk in my memory, internet wise, was when the COVID uh, pandemic hit and shut down travel, and we discovered Zoom. And we started having Zoom Filks.
Oh, it's hard to come in on the chorus though on a Zoom.
Like Fleming Chiffon introduced the Festival of the Living Rooms. The Toronto people have a monthly Filk group. They're called Filk Bites. The West Coast people out of Portland have a monthly Filk sing. I forget exactly their name. The European fandom has a weekly, I think, even on Thursday nights, I think it is, Zoom Filk sing. And conventions have even included Zoom tracks of the filking that could be, picked up. If you couldn't make it to the convention, you could listen to this particular filk on Zoom, because somebody had set up a camera at the strategic location and was Zoom filking the filk, the filk, that particular filk room.
So it's connection, it's sharing of songs and lyrics. Have Bandcamp and things like that made a big difference?
Uh, Bandcamp makes it easier if you want to get just a particular one song. You can also buy a whole album from them, but for from the point of view of the people who make and sell the Filk recordings these days, your your royalties from streaming are microscopic.
Yep,
It is much more cost effective if you can sell the CDs right there at the end of your concert, or have Bill Roper or somebody like that carry a fistful of them to conventions that you can't get to and sell them that way on the usual the usual markup, wholesale. You sell the CDs at like maybe 60% a sticker price to Bill, and then he places them. Katrina Joyner has a whole online Filk music dealership called Woks Print, WOKS Print, and she takes things. Uh, some of them, depending on how well she knows you, she might take them on consignment, or she might out and out buy half a dozen copies of your CD and add it to her merchandise list. But you can order Filk music, physical CDs from her. If you don't, I know some people, streaming is convenient, but I'm one of the people that really likes to have a physical CD because the it that can't disappear if your streaming platform folds up, uh, and
right.
they can't take it back the way Amazon has been reported to take back some books that are in there that are not physical hard copies that they sold you if it was an ebook thing. So you can get Filk online. The Ropers don't do online dealing yet. Bill was posting something. He's in the middle of doing his taxes, and he's realizing that, Dodeca Records is on the verge of going to conventions to sell music is a money losing proposition. He's having it harder and harder to clear enough sales at the convention to cover the costs, because going to conventions has gotten so expensive,
It's true.
especially the hotel room side. If you don't have a room split, remember when I was hucking Filk, I was happy if I made my table costs and my gas money. And I usually, sometimes I had a room split, sometimes I didn't. And when my daughter got big enough to be coming with me, um, I didn't have near as many room splits because I've got a rug rat with me. Uh, Up until she got up to about the second or third grade, where she was learning how to make change.
Put them to work. Absolutely.
I could set her at the table to help me sell stuff.
One of the frustrations I had back in the day was I'd hear a song at a Filk and I just wouldn't it wouldn't leave my mind. I keep remembering it, but not enough of it to sing. And now with the internet, you can find your recording and transcribe it, or hopefully find the words
So
already transcribed.
you can throw out a query with some fragment of the lyric or some fragment of what you remember it's about, and maybe who sang it, and within 24 hours generally you'll have an answer. And if the thing is still available, uh, if it can be bought online, they'll have the link to it, or three or four people will say, as far as I know, that's never been recorded, but I've got a lyric sheet with words and chords that I can run through a scanner and send you the PDF.
Is there a central location for that kind of thing? In folk music and traditional music, mudcat.org is phenomenal for finding lyrics and of traditional songs and so on. Is
I
folk
don't think
coordinated enough?
I think Filk is, the Filk publishing is still pretty disseminated. It's, the Wild West as far as marketing goes. There hasn't anybody come up to host the necessary bandwidth to be able to aggregate that information. But there's three or four Facebook groups. There's you know there's the various Zoom Filks. If you've got a question, if you're hunting for a Filk song, You can generally find it within a week if there is a physical copy of some sort of it, where somebody has either typed it up as a Word document and can email you that, or has a scanner and the book that it's in, they can scan that page and send you the PDF.
Well,
I've done a fair amount of that myself.
that's a huge help for people that are beginners or found something that they particularly love. Are there a lot of beginners at Filks these days, or is there so much
Yes,
professionalism? It's
we're
scary.
getting we're getting new people in quite frequently, and we encourage them to they also Filk who simply sit and listen and appreciate, because if there's no audience, we're just sitting there practicing in public. I mean, we're practically busking if there's no audience in place.
Gotta
That
put
we
your
don't
case
get
out
any
and ask for coins. Yeah.
so we appreciate the audience, and we appreciate when somebody in the audience comes up and says, I've written this lyric and I have a tune in my head. Would y'all mind if I sang it? And we say, oh, good, fresh blood. Yes, do your song. There's still people coming in, newbies coming in with have just discovered Filk. I see reports of somebody that's in a technical field, and one of the Filkers knows that there is a song that fits into that field, and they manage to get a CD or the streaming version to that techie, and the techie then listens to the whole album and says, "OMG, this stuff is great. Where do I find more?"
And down the rabbit hole they go.
Oh yes.
So, you've been writing folk songs since that rock country or whichever convention stimulated that first song. Do you have favorites among the songs that you've written?
Oh my goodness. No, I don't actually. I wrote a lot more songs per year when I first got into filking. It's been a while since I've come up with a new lyric. Um, the Other people have covered the area, or something just hasn't provoked me into into writing a lyric for something. I'm more often am doing covers when I'm in a Zoom filk rather than anything of my own. Although I do still do stuff of my own, but I there's just so much out there that I find and I love, and I my own stuff is still scattered through my songbook. You can see the shelf. This whole shelf here is Filk. A lot of this shelf, which runs off out of sight, is Filk. This up here is mundane folk music, but it includes things like the Joan Baez songbook and a songbook about John Denver's work, and a book by Jean, uh, uh, guy that wrote Jacques Brel is alive and well and living in Paris. Uh, anyway, um, and as I turned around, I spotted I've got one ring binder up there that just says Christmas on the rim on the edge of it. So that's my collection of Christmas music, which several years back I was able to take out. Morris was off at a chess thing, I think, or maybe it was a Civil Air Patrol event, and I had not joined CAP yet, which dates this to no later than November of 2007. Uh, I was the Saturday of Thanksgiving weekend, or maybe it wasn't Thanksgiving, maybe because I was still uh, getting back to Shambanicon. It was a nice Saturday in November, and the Salvation Army bell ringer was out in front of the Kroger. And so I brought my guitar and a chair and a music stand and my book of Christmas songs. And I sat there and sang through the whole book. And then the bell ringer and I took a lunch break, went in and got something from Kroger's Deli. I think she had packed along a lunch. I bought something from the deli. And then went back out, and by the end of the day, I said I had sung through the whole book. And so that's one item off my bucket list is sing Christmas songs in public like that. Since then, I have gotten less enchanted with the whole Salvation Army, but that was then and this is now. And I still have a nice memory of that day, of being able to sit out there. And I have busked in the farmer's market in Little Rock a few times. You have to get up god awful early to stake
Yeah,
out a decent location. And
at the
for the first
farmer's
hour,
market.
there's not anybody stopping to listen because it's all the the old ladies who are shopping for they're get out there getting their fresh vegetables for the week, and they're not stopping to listen. It takes a couple of hours before the families with kids start wandering around and doing, being tourists at the farmers market basically, and that's your market. But you got to be out there at the crack of dawn to get a good seat, uh, and kind of ration yourself while it's the grandmas doing the shopping. And I didn't do that terribly often, but I enjoyed it greatly when I was able to. And
Yeah.
I would play a mixture of uh, you know kind of some country western, some 60s folk music, some selected filk. One of my favorites to do in that was Naomi. Uh, uh, she was Naomi Konoff when I met her. Anyway, the zucchini song about beware of the dreaded zucchini. It grows 10 times faster than grass and buries each amateur gardener in vegetables up to their ass. Uh,
Plays well
that's
at the farmer's market.
always my lead-off song for the farmers market busking, and I'd repeat it a couple of times during the morning.
I get away with doing engineer's hymn and maritime sings. All I have
Mm-hmm.
to do is change it from ions to steam or something, one word in the
Change it,
chorus.
change it back to steam
It,
because
it's
Kipling was
it's
writing about
Kipling. Yeah,
Kipling.
exactly,
Him
exactly.
was all about the steam engine in the big ships, and Leslie
Yep,
just picked out a few verses.
works really well. So when you're not starting the first Filk convention and you're not starting one of the first or running one of the first Filk related fanzines or foundations or anything else, what else have you been up to?
I worked in engineering drafting for nearly 40 years at a variety of places. The longest was the Arkansas Highway Department Roadway Design Division, where when people ask me, what do you do there? I say, I measure piles of dirt and holes in the ground. Because
Um,
when you're building a road, you're either piling up dirt and paving the top of the pile or scraping out a gully and paving the bottom of the gully. And I was the one that figured out how much dirt had to be moved in either case at one point in my career there.
there should be a Filk in that.
Well,
Uh,
I did do a filk about the construction of a particularly elaborate interchange in Little Rock where I had to go through on my commute to work. And about every 3 weeks, the exact route through the construction area would change. And so I did a filk on that and I cannot find the lyrics to it anymore.
check the
Except
internet.
the seed crystal for the lyric was, uh, you gotta turn left, you gotta turn left, you gotta turn left this morning. Because at some point during it, you did have to turn left to take the route that I needed to go to. And that would change exactly where the left turn corner happened. It would change every few weeks.
That's pretty good. I know one of the things that you've done is gotten involved with the U.S. Air Force Auxiliary. Could you tell us a little bit about that?
Okay, my husband had retired. I had been an airplane fan for a long time, and he discovered the Civil Air Patrol through the good offices of our friend Chuck Bishop, who is also a science fiction reader and a filking fan. And as a matter of fact, he and I traveled to Gafilk in Georgia regularly if we're not snowed out, like what happened this year. He drives over from Little Rock, picks me up, and we go off to Atlanta. But Chuck had invited Morris to go to a CAP meeting, and Morris had been a ham radio person for several years by that point. And so he drifted into the Civil Air Patrol's radio network. And then I decided, well, I'll just go along one time or two because I never mind hanging around at airports. And I discovered the aerospace education branch of Civil Air Patrol, which teaches aerospace history and basic aerodynamic facts of life about, lift and drag and gravity uh, and such like. And also, about a week after I actually joined the CAP, I took my copy of Minus 10 and Counting down to Kinko's and very carefully Xeroxed every page in it as the start of a collection of songs about aerospace. And the collection has been growing ever since to where it's now in a ring binder with a 1-inch spine. If I hold it up to the camera, the lettering comes out backwards, but what it says is aerospace songs.
Yep.
And it includes things by Filkers. It includes some stuff by some folk, traditional folkies. There's a guy up in Minnesota, I think, called Bill Staines, who has written 2 aviation songs. One about a guy in England who rebuilt or made a replica of a famous racing seaplane from the 1920s, and unfortunately met his death when the thing came apart in midair and crashed. But Bill Staines made a nice song about Mr. Hosey and his dream of sail the skies in the ghost of a supermarine. And then he also did one about Tingmissartoq, which is the airplane that Charles and Ann Lindbergh flew on a couple of survey missions for the Pan American World Airways when Pan Am was just getting started doing its transatlantic clipper routes. And in order to get to China or Africa, they had to fly around the rim of either the Atlantic or the Pacific, which is how their airplane got its name. Their first flight was to the west, around the northern Atlantic rim, up through Canada and Greenland and Iceland, and then finally to Scotland, and then down the coast of Africa to check out the possibilities of harbors in the area of Senegal at the furthermost curve of the African bulge there, because Tingmissartoq is an Inuit word that means flies like a bird. And so that was the name of their airplane, and it is now in the Smithsonian Institution, and I have seen it in person. It was a big old thing, and which is good because they had to pack all of their stuff for the whole trip and figure out very carefully what was going to be needed first. That had to be on top of the stack. Stuff that wasn't going to be needed until they got to Mauritania could be further down. And then a couple of years later, they did the same thing in North to the Orient is the book that Ann Lindbergh wrote about that. She wrote one about the Atlantic one too, which I haven't run across a copy of yet. But I read North to the Orient out of a library somewhere along the way, where they went up through Alaska and down Siberia's coast on the run, unquote, from Bill's song about it, and then along the China coast looking for good places for the clippers to land all the way down, past Hong Kong. And so I've got that one. I've got a couple that I made up myself or adapted myself. There's I've shown this to a few people in the CAP, and a couple of them were enthralled by the fact that there was music about flying.
How could there not be? Come take a ride in my airship, right?
Right.
There's a
Josephine
lot.
and my flying machine.
Yeah. exactly. So, in addition to music, do you have other involvement with the organization?
Yes, I do. My In addition to teaching aerospace education to the cadets and to the seniors members, I do my we do a lot of emergency services in the Civil Air Patrol, disaster relief, disaster surveys of disasters after they have happened. The latest wrinkle in that is they are flying the little quadcopter drones and even bigger ones than that to do the airborne photography because you can cover a lot more ground with a quadcopter drone in an
Mm,
afternoon really than you can and get better photography because you can be you taking pictures more often to where you can actually make maps of the area of the stitched together photos, and CAP at the wing headquarters has the software to do that. But to support these missions, uh, there's also a good bit of a plane has crashed somewhere and or a plane didn't show up when we expected it. Here's its planned route of flight. Get out there and see if you can find whether they just landed somewhere and are stuck in the mud, but okay, or whether there has been an actual crash or a crash is reported. Somebody saw a plane going down trailing smoke and they can give us an approximate location and we send out a team, first an aerial team to locate it, and then they lead the ground team in. There's a whole support staff somewhere that is keeping track of what is happening, who's with which group, where they're going, how long they've been out there, and part of what that is what I do. It's called a mission staff assistant, and my prime qualification for being an MSA is I have run the convention check-in desk at a whole lot of conventions. The AP has a check-in desk. And we had so that as people come in, they sign in. They got to where a lot of the sign in can be pre-done online, but there still has to be a paper sheet there because sometimes people will sign in to be in this exercise and they wake up with 103-degree fever, so they can't participate. And so
I
we have a paper sheet to verify who actually made it to the event.
that We're lucky you're still involved in fandom. That the
Right. And
CAP stuff sounds
we also
exciting.
frequently get to go fetch the pizza for lunch.
Yeah, well, that has to get done too. You're still going to conventions, you're still filking.
Yes.
Are you getting the same things out of it, or are you getting different things out of it? What keeps you in fandom?
It's the community. That's very true that fandom is a family, and my particular family subgroup within fandom is the Filkers, and I get a chance to actually face to face talk to them. These days, Filking has gotten so distributed that actually I'm doing more listening to the people that are new and wonderful than I am singing myself. I'll get into a circle from time to time, but other times I just wander in and listen. We were talking about filking groups. The latest one to pop up is a group of fans based in Germany that are called. They are also all into barbershop quartet singing, and so there is now a Filk CD. The cover of it is a rather generic spaceship, kind of like the one in Destination Moon or Forbidden Planet, only it's striped like a barber pole. And the name of the group is said, well, if Filk is a typo from folk to Filk, we'll just take barbershop and change the O at the end of it to an I, and so their group name is Barbership. And they premiered their album on this side of the Atlantic at OVFF this past OVFF, and it's delightful. And I promptly went around to Bill Roper's table and bought a copy after their
That's
concert.
great. Uh, um, so I think we're gonna Thank you. And I think soon we're going to go to questions. So if you have a question, please note it in the chat. I see we have several there already. Margaret, what
I
stories would you like to tell that I didn't ask about?
We were talking about scanned issues of Kantele. Gary
Uh-huh.
M. in chat says he has a set of scanned
Oh,
Kantele from Harold Stein, and
yep.
we'll get in touch with y'all to see if
Uh,
it's used.
I'm very happy to do that. That sounds like it'll be a great addition. Uh, Thanks to primarily the work of Eli Goldberg, we have a whole bunch of Filk fanzines online, from Filk Phenomenon to the Hawaiian newsletter, which I won't try to pronounce, and Filking Times, I think. The more, the merrier. Are what we want to digitally preserve the fanzines that have been published in the past, and we have a lot of them. So, Margaret, before we go to questions, what stories would you like to tell that I wasn't smart enough to ask?
Oh my. Well, let's see. I had mentioned about Joe Haldeman borrowing my virgin guitar to sing the Ballad of Eskimo Nell at my first FANACon.
We just got a copy of that from Sprague de Camp's papers, and I blushed reading it, and I'm in my 70s. So if Joe was singing that, he was a brave soul.
Well, I mean, you got to remember, Joe is the guy that actually wrote Stan Long. So, uh,
But that's not dirty. Anyways, go ahead.
stories. The Denver World Con, I think it was Denvention 2. It was the year that
1981.
Gordon Dixon won 2 Hugos. And since I and Mary Kay Jackson, who later became Mary Kay Care, were sitting each side of Gordy after he got the first one, he handed me the first one when he went up to get the second one. So I got to sit there and hold a Hugo for several minutes.
That's exciting. A fresh one.
And yep. And let me think here. The the year that Steve McDonald wanted to go to every Filk convention that year, and uh, he was selling T-shirts to help fund things. And I decided to take one of his T-shirts, and there by that time I knew that there were a number of people in Filk who do quilting, and
Mhm.
so I put the word out, says, "Okay, we're going to do an around the world quilt, starting with the cover art for the T-shirt, and then starting with January, we have a border of that referred to Filk that year. And then we'd have a border that referred to the English Filk Convention that year. And then we'd have a border around whatever was the Southern California Filk Convention that was next. So we did a border for every convention that year, including WorldCon. Um, and because and unfortunately that was the year that both Pole and Gordy died, and so I have uh, corner pieces in the Worldcon thing, which is basically a bunch of kites because of Benjamin Franklin. The Worldcon was in Philadelphia that year, but I've got a couple of corner pieces featuring Gordy and Pole's Hoka characters. I found some teddy bear fabric that I could, extract small squares featuring one particular Hoka teddy bear dressed up as something or other. Since that was the Hoka's deal, was they love dressing up and cosplaying basically. And so that was the World Dream quilt, and it was we sold raffle tickets all year round, and it was I don't remember how much it raised, but it made a significant contribution, and eventually a lady from Germany named Yela Smith won it, and we had to Mongol mail it to uh, to Germany. I packed it up and bundled it tight, and I forget what the exact route was, but I think it may have been Steve McDonald himself taking it back across the pond when he was returning to Germany, because by that time not too long after that was when he moved to Germany permanently. And so we basically Mongol mailed the quilt to Yellen. And
Um,
for those who might not be familiar with the concept of Mongol mail, it's when, I'm holding something that needs to get to somebody over there, and I know somebody that's going in that general direction, and so I'll give it to them, and then they give it to somebody else, and eventually the last person in the chain gives it to the recipient.
uh, that is a good traditional way to send things out. Tell us another story. I'm looking for a picture of your quilt because I think you sent one to me.
Okay. Well, there's also the Interfilk quilt at Gufilk, which
Maybe
got
that's what I'm thinking
great.
about.
I think I sent you the Gufilk quilt.
Okay,
Uh,
different one.
the I do have a picture of the finished World Dream quilt from, I think it was like 1996 or so, that it finally got finished and wrapped up and shipped across the pond. But the Gufilk does a quilt every year. That started because the very first Filk, I was working on a quilt, and for some of the Filk unit things during the concerts, I was sitting in the back of the room piecing on my quilt. Dell, I don't remember what her name was, last name was at that time. She's now Dell Stinnett. She was doing a piece of Hardanger embroidery. Kathleen Sloan was beading something. Uh, Jan DeMasi was also beading something. Somebody else, Kathy Horning, was doing needlepoint. Somebody else was crocheting. And so we had all these finger and fiber crafts going at the back of the room. And during the Dead Dog, I tossed out the idea we should do a show and tell next year for all these finger and fiber crafters who sit out at the back of the room and listen to all the filking while they're doing it. Show us what they've been making. And that went around the room a little, and Brenda came up with, is there some way that we could turn this into something to raise money for Interfilk? I said, well, we could do quilt blocks, do small quilt blocks, an 8-inch square, which is about the size of your typical pot holder, is easy to make. And we can just hitch them together and however many blocks we get, and then raffle off the result. So the raffle, that's what we do. We make blocks on Saturday. I have 3 good-sized sterilite tubs of quilting supplies, and the convention now also has an emergency quilt kit because this year was not the first time that I had missed a Filk because of this. The other one was medical reasons, and so I put together the quilt kit the following year. So we make the blocks on Saturday, and them as knows what they're doing for quilting can just grab a handful of fabric, and I have thread and needles and pins, and they go ye therefore and you know do patchwork. But it's also set up so that people who know nothing about sewing but have ideas. I collect fabric with interesting prints of it, especially, of course, anything with spaceships. Yeah, anything with spaceships, like the one in the top row just to the right of center, and anything with aviation things, or something related to it. I see a balloon in the top left one. I see, uh, let me see, I see musical instruments in several of them. I believe the second row, right hand in, may be a bookshelf with cats in it. We also collect cat fabrics. And we also have people who do embroidery or Sharpie pen work on the blank squares that are relevant. I think the picture just below the one with all the embroidery is one that Tanya Huff did. She did an actual picture in patchwork in an 8-inch square. It blew my mind when she brought that one back. But the ones right below it with the musical fabric as a background and the musical instruments cut out, I have a box of fabrics, and I've got another box of fabrics I cut out the motif figures and have a thing called Wonder Under on the backside, which is a heat fusing stuff. and you can use it to baste things down. And then I have my sewing machine there and can zigzag around the the pictures, and we put the blocks together and I pin them up on a piece of fabric, and then I take it home. After we have the raffle, I get the contact information for the lucky winner. This most recent one was won by Gretchen Roper, who wasn't even there, but Kathleen Sloan, after winning 3 quilts, has taken to buying a bunch of tickets and writing other people's names on the backside of the ticket. So that people who are, who maybe didn't buy didn't feel brave enough to buy a ticket, or maybe they're not even there, like Gretchen, have a chance at winning the quilt. And so I've got the box of fabrics. Brenda Sutton took it home with her and packed it in a box and sent it to me. I've got the box of the blocks, and I got a picture of how they had it hung up. Brenda commandeered a garment stand from Alice Tinsley, who is one of the Filk committee people there in the Atlanta area, and got it hung up. And she took a picture of that, so I know, what all blocks we've got there. And as I recall, I'm going to have to make a couple of blocks to fill in, make the oblong come out solid, and then I'll put it together and get it to the lucky winner. There is no promise on exactly how long it will take me to do that, because last year I was literally making the label for the quilt that Shirley France had won the previous year, and installing the label on the quilt at Filk last year, and before I could hand it to her. And Larry Kirby won that year's quilt, and I had it finished before the convention, and then I wound up not being able to go to the convention, so I had to ship it to him. But depending on my energy level, I have gotten this thing finished off as early as June. More frequently, it tends to be August or September before I get the quilt finished and can, email the person to say, "Hey, I'm getting ready to put it in the postal pipeline."
It sounds like you are never bored and you are never idle. So, you ready to take a couple of questions?
Yeah.
Okay, Gary, would you please unmute? And
Hello, hello.
Hello. I can
ask
hear you.
your question.
Yes, the question that I had was that Filk has become something of a distinct subculture of fandom, but when it started out, it was really just regular fans getting together after hours and singing. So
Yeah.
how and when did it transition to becoming a more distinct subculture?
I think when we first started having, um, there was Kantele, there was Xenophilkia, there was Filk Phenomenon, there were a couple of other Filk-related zines that I didn't find out about at the time, and circulating that and getting the Filkers in an information loop within their own, within the group, basically. And then when we were able to start having Filk conventions that were separate from the Filk events at a convention, like FanCon has a music track. Its ConCon was very Filker heavy when it was put together. And as a matter of fact, they were selling T-shirts. The front of it said, "Got Filk," and on the backside it said, "FanCon has." And so they have always had a music track, and it's not perfectly Filkish. There's a couple of musicians local to the Dallas area who are more rock and roll types, and so they have a concert. They have concert slots on the music track too. Um, but I think the uh, coalescing of the Filkers as a culture really began when we were able to start having separate conventions where we didn't necessarily have to wait until 10 o'clock at night before we could do our thing.
Thank you.
And
Thank you.
there's a song about that too, because Bill Roper and Cliff Flint wrote "The Title Will Follow," and it starts out, "It was the strangest filksing we had ever seen." something about, we start at 10. You mean p.m., of course, and then, oh, guess again. We were starting filking at 10 o'clock in the morning, which is about as early as anybody's ever been able to put a daytime filk together on organized thing. Now people gather in the hallway and start trading songs, of course.
And
But
they
I
give
think
you a 10 a.m. concert at busking.
time for programmed filking.
It used to be we'd still be up from the night before, but not so much anymore.
No, there's some folks that are still that hardy and young enough. But it's been a while since I filked all night.
Yeah, me too. Me too. Thank you, Gary. Cecilia, would you please unmute and ask your question? Cecilia. Um, have we lost her? Okay, I guess she must have dropped off. All right, well, oh, there she is. She's coming back. Oh, come back, come back. Cecilia, when you're back, would you unmute and ask your question, please?
Cecilia, come back. We're waiting.
Yeah, there she goes. All right, well, hello?
Hello. Yes, I just ran out of battery on my laptop, so I'm on my cell. My question was, at what point did the Filk musicians start being invited as program participants the same way the authors and artists were? And when did they start getting put on panels and workshops and concerts instead of just being fans that liked to sing?
I think that varied a lot with regions and concoms. I know that, as I was just saying, FanCon has always had a music track and has always had a music guest, and they're not necessarily filkers. They started out pretty much, they ran through a whole bunch of filkers, but lately they've been getting other people like this year. Well, Carla Obrick is a found filker, and her husband Joe was actually the official music guest. She was a special guest, and I'm sorry that I missed hearing them because Joe is a fantastic guitar player. I told Carla once that I think the only part of the guitar that I have never seen Joe use to make music with or percussion with, and he's playing something, is the string where the guitar is tied onto his shoulder strap is tied onto the guitar neck. And she said, "Oh, no, God, don't tell him that. He'll figure out how."
Okay, and
But
go
I'm
ahead.
not really sure. The And FanCon has been 20 years ago that it started. Um, Other conventions, non not specifically Filkish, that I have been to. I remember Kathy Marr was the first Filkish music guest at a Worldcon at the Denvention 3 that I did not get to go to. Um, the I am not real sure when other conventions started having music guests because that was probably about the time where I was having to pull back from convention going because the during the school year my convention route was limited to places that I could get to Friday after school let out. I could take Friday afternoon off, but I had to pick up my daughter at school at 3 o'clock. And so any place we could get to, leaving Little Rock at 3 o'clock, that still pretty much limited me to Nashville to the east and Tulsa to the west. During the summer, we could go further afield. I remember taking her to Incon Junction in Indianapolis, which is roughly the 4th of July weekend or shortly thereafter. Um, but yeah, it was the year I taught her to read the highway map. So that I had what the green signs meant along the road. Those little numbers on the side of the road, that's how many miles we are from the end of the road. And here's how to read the map and how to pick out a town that looks like it might have bathrooms at the gas station at the exit and bathrooms, so that we don't get the "Mommy, I gotta go" just as we pass the entrance ramp from the interchange we just passed. Uh, she was like 11 at that point. Uh, but
Thank you.
the I am not real sure exactly when other conventions that are not the more general conventions having a music guest. When I started going to Shambanicon, they didn't have music guests. They had a writer guest, they had a fan guest, they had Andy Office as Toastmaster, and that was it. And it wasn't until quite a bit later, after the Suttons took over the management of the convention, that they started having an actual string of musical events in addition to the usual laid-back programming for a Shambanicon.
Hmm.
I think that Filkers as guests started in the early 80s. At Tropicon in South Florida, we had a special guest, Filker, every year. And
Mhm.
the reason they were a special guest is because we were a young, poor convention and couldn't afford to fly them in. So we would essentially take up a collection among the Filkers to pay for their way. And so we put them on program. They filked as part of the program. They talked as part of the program. And I'm pretty sure we were not the first ones to have that idea. And the earliest Filk program I remember was in 77. I'm sure there were things before that too. So my corner of the world. Thank you, Cecilia. Can you go
Thank
back
you.
on mute now? And we had one more from Stuart Herring. Um, Stuart, are you still there? Unmute, please.
I see him on the program list, yes.
Yeah, I'm right here, right
Okay.
beside you. No,
So
this
did
is
do
particularly
you
for you,
do you
Edie.
have a picture to show us? Can you
Well,
try to?
I tried to post it and it said I couldn't because of admin restrictions. Hmm.
Oh, I'm sorry. I thought I had opened it up for that. Well, we almost had a picture of one of your quilts, but the one we saw will have to do. Are there any other questions for Margaret? Any other comments for Margaret? I don't think that we have any other questions. Margaret, thank you so much for coming and spending a couple of hours with us.
I have
It's
enjoyed it
exciting
enormously.
to, I was a subscriber, I think, to not Kantele, whatever it's pronounced
Right,
as. And it's a lot of fun, 50 years later almost, to have you
right.
here to talk about it.
The
So,
One of the things you're talking about the internet and
uh-huh.
filking is it broadened our experience enormously as far as listening, getting to hear filkers from outside of North America. The German filkers, the English filkers, uh, and the Australian filkers. Uh, they're people that I would never have had probably never have had a chance to to meet here in person, um, unless they were brought over as an Interfilk guest uh, to some convention that I was going to, like OVFF or GAFilk, because I know some of the English filkers were early on in the convention. I think Annie Griffith and her then husband were the Interfilk guests, and a couple of their other bandmates. And Karis paid their own way there to where there'd be a British presence at the convention that year.
So there's a question that's come up in the chat. Are you planning to be at Worldcon in Seattle?
No, I got a big medical spring coming up, and I won't be going anywhere until at least June, which is when I go to SoonerCon in Norman, Oklahoma, with my carpool group out of Little Rock, and I haven't really made any plans beyond that. except I am pre-registered for OVFF next fall. To I drove to Pemmican with Chuck Bishop, and Chuck is a driving fool. We left Little Rock at 5 o'clock in the morning and drove up the stem, that toward Winnipeg there. We got to Winnipeg actually a few minutes, it was like 23 hours later, driving straight through, not stopping for sit down meals. We would hit the takeout portion of these the convenience store at the gas stations. And I had my first Timbits as a result of that once we got into Canada. And we got to Winnipeg, and it was way too early to check into our hotel room, of course. And so we found a Holiday Inn Express or something like that that had a room. And so we crashed, and then got up the next morning and checked into the hotel with a side trip. Before that, we went to the local aviation museum because, as I say, Chuck is who got me into, and Morris, into Civil Air Patrol. And we are now going to have the obligatory cat, because my cat just showed up and sat down on a chair next to me, and I have outraged him enormously by scooping him up. But we got to have a cat. It's a Zoom thing. We got to have a cat. All right, Baggy, you can have the chair back. His name is Bagheera.
That's a perfect name.
Right, and we drove to Pemmican, and we came home by way of the EAA Air Venture in Oshkosh, Wisconsin, which is, for a certain segment of the aviation population, the equivalent of, in prestige, of Worldcon, in size the equivalent of DragonCon. And for that week, it is the busiest airport in the world for the week, and plus a couple of days that the Air Venture happens. And so we got our airplane fixed, and then drove back to Little Rock in one day, which is not as long a day as driving to Winnipeg had been, but it was still a good long day's drive.
Well, you're still a traveling giant. You go to conventions all over. You bring your music all over, and we thank you for driving to the Zoom and being part of the session today. So I think we're done and with the questions. So Margaret, thank you very much for joining us.